The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Faster Mike, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Manx Radio. We're live on the air with Thomas MHK, Douglas Central MHK, first elected at a by-election in 2013, re-elected in 2016, re-elected in 2021, 10 years in Keys, formerly 2 ministerial portfolios, most recently infrastructure, and before that policy and reform. So if you want to chat to Thomas MHK, or you want to get in touch, you can text 166 177, email studio@manxradio.com, WhatsApp 166 177, or call 66 13 68. Faster Mike, good afternoon, Thomas.
Good afternoon, looking forward to talking with everybody.
Good to see you today. Everybody wants to know the big question, Thomas, what exactly happened?
One weekend, 16th of July, I was phoned up by the Chief Minister, and he explained that because of Liverpool ferry terminal, Crogga gas, and one other issue, he was going to abolish the Department of Infrastructure, and so therefore I couldn't be Minister of Infrastructure anymore. We had a brief discussion about a disagreement about explaining each of those things. So later on that evening, 6 o'clock on that Sunday, I had my functions as Minister taken away from me, and on Monday the announcement was made that I was no longer Minister of Infrastructure.
Did you take it personally?
No, I'm long enough in the tooth, as you said. I've been a politician for 10 years. I'll still be friendly with Alf personally. We disagree, always have done, on certain political issues, and I believe he's got the wrong way forward for the Department of Infrastructure and indeed more generally for the government. And it's important that I can now contribute actively to what I described as a smooth transition in the Department of Infrastructure, because in the last year they've started off in the right direction and they believe in themselves much more in all of the problem areas of the Department of Infrastructure. So therefore my statement was I wanted to keep the momentum going there so we can actually fix the real problems that we've got. We don't need political rhetoric, we need to fix real problems. Right. We've got bigger problems elsewhere in government even than in the Department of Infrastructure. We've got a shortage of finance, and I think he admitted in Tim Wood the following Tuesday that one of the real reasons was that he wanted to have his personal hands on the gas decision to do with varying the licence for Crogga, and I'm sure that will come up quite a lot today.
So it's been mentioned many times that the DOI is labyrinthine. It's like the Hampton Court maze. It's absolutely enormous. Is the DOI too big? Does it have to be broken up, or does it have to be got rid of?
Certainly it's the case that it's got lots of parts. So from a manager's point of view, it's impossible for the chief executive and the senior managers to manage all of the parts because they're so different. So therefore, we have to remember that the Department of Infrastructure was the first department of government to get a non-executive director. That was announced with big fanfare a couple of Christmases ago. The chief officer in the Department of Infrastructure was appointed first. I championed that personally, said we needed to have a permanent person in place, and that officer and our senior management team have actually been building management structures for all of the disparate parts, and that's part of what I say in terms of what was going on. Right, you can't fix the airport without having the right board structure and management structure and staff structure around the airport, and I'm sure we'll come back to that. You can't sort out buses where there are issues again brewing without it. Essentially, and from a political level, I worked so hard during that year to get to understand the problems. It's just naive of the Chief Minister to think he can go in and speed things up without, having had all the experience I've had. So I've visited every one of the fleet services, mechanics places. I've been to all of the harbours. I've sat in the air traffic control tower in its various parts and various other parts of the airport and so on and so on. And essentially, the infrastructure's got lots of problems, transport's got lots of problems. Rob Collister made a good point, which is it needs to work better with tourism, the Department for Enterprise it is, and I just think the Chief Minister's chosen exactly the wrong time to go in there and act like a bit of a bull in a china shop. I mean, how daft is it just before the summer holidays, just as the budget is being put together, to actually upset everybody and change things?
The situation with Crogga then, a difference of opinion, a difference of policy, a difference of outcome. Where are you in behind that?
So it's not as simple as people make out. It's not about green versus non-green, petrol head versus non-petrol head. It's not like that. There's a licence given in good faith by the government to Crogga to enable them to exploit, produce hydrocarbons. Huge amount of natural wealth there, and that's national asset of the Isle of Man people. That's what it is. It's a very precious resource that's can change the lives of future generations. But we've got to make sure that it's exploited properly in the benefits of the people. And to do that, the company that's got the licence has to demonstrate the financial capacity to meet its obligations in the future. It also has to demonstrate competence to be able to do that. And there are differences of opinion between the three people who've now been appointed to make the decision. Stu Peters, it seems, Kate Lord-Brennan and Alf Cannon. They're the politicians who are now getting involved, and what I believe the officers and their expert advisors have recommended, which is it seems absolutely crucial to have a seismic survey. Everywhere else in the British Isles has a seismic survey before they do these sorts of investigations. So there are essentially, it seems to me a little bit, it's Mr. Cannon versus expert opinion in this.
So in any way did you thwart the ambitions of Crogga?
Well, no, but you have to be more specific. So the case they've made is that the regulations are not in place as yet. Well, the first drill is not expected till 2026, and there's a good programme in place to put those regulations in place. I mean, lots of what Mr. Hubbard in particular says is just not quite right. It's wrong even. So we've had, and we have regulations in place for seismic surveys. Crogga has benefited from those regulations a number of times to have the opportunity to do a seismic survey. As early as 1995, we had drilling rig regulations in the Isle of Man. You'll remember Clifford Irving and Alex Downey and Eddie Lowie. You'll remember that there was a drilling rig off Douglas Head. There was another one off the Point of Ayre. We've got all of those regulations. That's a simple matter. It's just a question of bringing modern regulations to be handled competently by people with modern experience to actually do the drilling. What matters is actually having the financial capacity, the competence to actually do it right, so that we don't damage the national wealth, the future from so many people in this island, the huge amount of money we could get from this gas by doing it wrongly. So it doesn't, this is not about a chief minister lifespan. It's not about a House of Keys lifespan. This is about years. The gas has been there for millions of years, and it'll still be there for a few more years. So we've got to do this properly, and that's the difference of opinion. I wanted to do things properly, and I'm standing up for expert advisors. The worst moment in Tuesday in Tynwald was when Alf Cannon said that we didn't have proper external advisors, and I stand by the British Geological Survey, and I stand by the current modern experts who were put in place by our non-executive director and the rest of the team around this project, whatever anybody else says.
Hi, Bonzo, you're live with Chris Thomas MHK.
Yeah, hello Andy, and hello Chris. Yeah, it's how coincidental that you were mentioning Mr. Hubbard. And I suppose what I ought to do now is ask the same question which I asked David Ashford when he was on this show, a month ago, maybe more. Was the department aware of Richard Hubbard's previous involvement with the Statoil bribes scandal in 2001, 2003, I think it was, and that the fact that he had been fined by the Norwegian courts and was a person noted by the US Department of Justice, I think it was, and the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Well, I'm aware of that. That's a matter of public record on the internet, for instance. Even Statoil, I think, was an employer after leaving British Petroleum. But that's not the point. The main point I'm making. The main point is that there's competence and there's financial capacity in this decision. Everybody has something in their past, and what's absolutely important is that this decision is made properly about varying the licence. So I'm focusing on financial capacity, competence of the overall team, and whether or not we can vary the licence so that the seismic survey doesn't need to go first. Obviously, there's this argument that's been put forward that the flow rate is what matters. Well, look, let me describe in picture terms. It's hard to do this on the radio, but what we're talking about, I don't even if you know this, Andy, but I'll ask Andy for a bit of an educational game. How far below the seabed is the gas in the Isle of Man, Andy?
I have no clue.
So there you go. So Andy hasn't got a clue, and we've been talking about this for months on the radio, but it's 2 kilometres below the seabed, and we've got a drill that's a metre wide when it goes in, and it gets down at the bottom to about 6 inches wide, and we've got to point that and drill in the right places and go off on the side, and that's a pretty precious and dangerous and difficult job to do. We need to do it properly with a proper company, and basically that's what this is all about. It's about competence to actually make sure that we get the hydrocarbons, that we don't damage them, we don't pollute anything, we do it properly, and that's what I was sticking up for, and that's what the expert advice team that's been in the DOI, and I'm so pleased I can say this so openly now.
Implicit, though, in what you're saying is that are you doubting the competence of Crogga to either use the right gear, get the right people, do the right job?
I'm neither doing that either, but what I am saying is that they need tens of millions to actually be able to prove under the existing licence that they can, hundreds of millions for full production, and we've got to make sure that they have got those 100 millions, and we've got to make sure that they actually have the right people in place to do that. So in good faith, the process was working out. The regulations are a small little thing. You know, the North Sea Transition Authority is helping the department greatly. Attorney General's chambers are helping it. They've got external advisors, and it made me so mad when the Chief Minister doubted the qualification of the advisors and the legal advice. This is not about a commercial interest. This is about the national interest. The hydrocarbons are precious. They need to be exploited. I heard Laurie Hooper a few days ago say that he wouldn't do it even if they were exploitable. Well, that's not right. He's wrong on that. We have it in good faith given a licence to Crogga, and if they can meet the terms of the licence, you know, they will make a lot of money, as will the nation of the Isle of Man, in terms of exploiting these hydrocarbons. If they can't meet the terms of the licence, however varied, you know, the licence will be there for somebody else. Also, what came up when I was talking on Perspective with Phil Gorn is apparently 10 years ago, even as recently as 6 or 7 years ago, there was an idea that we would organise the seismic survey from other resources, and then we would go around again to bigger companies and let them look for our gas to help us exploit our gas. So that's another possibility. Look, it wasn't... Andy, you'll remember, I'm sorry to remind you, but you'll remember that, you know, there was ELF out there was Marathon out there, BP was doing this. This was all 25, 30 years ago. There's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be doing this properly. We can't be doing this cheaply. We can't be just doing this at a lower standard than elsewhere. We've got to make sure that we do this properly.
Bonzo?
Well, you were talking about competence and confidence. Now, I think that Richard Hubbard and the other people involved now in Crogga are not exactly ones to inspire confidence. They certainly don't, I think, have the competencies to go to full exploration. And if they discovered anything, then that would be a question of them, I think, selling on in order for somebody to do the exploitation. And if then that occurs, all these promises of fantastic amounts of wealth for the Isle of Man would just be nonsensical. But then again, if you've ever seen anything to do, I think there was something on Channel 4, I think I was mentioning earlier in the week, a 3-minute segment about the expansion of North Sea oil and gas licenses, and how the idea that this was going to make lots more money was complete nonsense. I don't think that this snake oil, it really does what people claim.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it there. Bonzo, thanks for that. That's the situation with Crogga. I just want to move on to, and this is something you were probably involved in at the back end of your DOI tenure, this thing about banning large vehicles and motorhomes on residential roads. Lots of people have got very excited about the fact, and the motorhome community is furious with the fact that motorhomes may be banned on speed-restricted roads. Were you involved in this?
Yeah, so basically last autumn we began the process of developing a highways maintenance charter. So we had a series of regional meetings to which chairs and clerks of all of the local authorities were invited around the island. We have 4 meetings. At that, we floated the idea that that the department would think about using new powers it now has and has had since 2021 to specify certain areas and certain vehicles for controls for parking on street in overnight and at weekends. And so therefore, quite rightly, the the local authorities basically gave the department the idea that they should take the lead, as is often the case in these things. So the department wrote to local authorities with a suggestion. I'm sure that once the responses have been collated, there will be a public consultation about this, and the consultation started in a way because the motorhome communities made their position clear. Commercial vehicles drivers have made their position clear. Perhaps it would have been an alternative way of going about it, doing a public consultation first, but we probably have had two public consultations then, because we'd still have had to another one had one on the specifics of the proposal. It's not only about towns, remember as well, there are lots of little lanes around the island where people park lots of big vehicles, so it involves rural areas, urban areas, and I hope people can accept that lots of people have raised issues with larger vehicles, other people's larger vehicles parked outside their homes and in parts of the island in the countryside, and we need to decide whether we need a new policy, and if we have a policy, we need to decide whether we have an enforcement regime.
Sue dropped a note in on 768 and just says, during the last administration, Chris ran some meetings to try and garner opinions and ideas about the current system of paying for care. There were many angry people about the unfairness of the current system and some good ideas how to make it fairer. I admired Chris Thomas for attempting to address this difficult problem, but since the new administration arrived, seems to have been swept under the carpet. I realise Chris now has a different role, but wonder what happened to all the information gathered from those meetings, and is something going to be done to improve things?
Okay, well, thank you, Sue. You are right, we were very passionate about it. It wasn't only me, there was a group of backbenchers and ministers. Julie Edge, Anne Corlett, I seem to remember, was involved. I seem to remember it was Ray Harmer, David Ashford as well. And we had those meetings with officers, we produced lots of information, and then eventually it was decided by the Department of Health and Social Care particularly, but also Treasury, that work would be put on hold pending review of national insurance and review of adult social care, and essentially the work stream was transferred to what's called the Healthcare Transformation Board. Nothing happened for 4 years as far as I can see, but in the last Tynwald it was announced that work is starting again, slightly behind where we got to 4 or 5 years ago, but at least they're starting again, and now they're looking at two options. They're looking at what they're calling the Scottish model, which basically means an increase in general tax to pay for these sorts of things, or the Jersey model, which is quite similar to the sort of cap and threshold one that's now being talked about across. So it would have been so much better if we'd started this 5-6 years ago. It would have been even better if we'd started making arrangements 10, 15, 20 years ago. It is a crisis in care. It really isn't fair, and I really appreciate Sue raising this, because we have to have a national discussion and make some decisions and start deciding who's going to pay now, but for decades into the future as well. There's got to be a multi-generational solution. It can't be at the expense of different types of people. It's got to be fair to future generations as well as to people now.
Is there an existential, well, you mentioned the word crisis, in providing care, paying for care, and obviously people simply have to have dignity in old age. That's a given. But as you say, who pays for it? And this is part of a kind of an existential thing with where we are at the moment. Yep. Nobody's ever talked about the Isle of Man for 20, 30 years about having problems with money. Yeah, and now we're having David Ashford saying that the reserves will be at a critical level. There'll be a crisis at the end of this administration.
Yeah, it's not only David Ashford. I've been saying that for some time. I call it fragile, and I think the Treasury Minister himself, Dr. Allinson, admitted all of that in front of the Economic Affairs Policy Review Committee. So in Jersey, they're now paying an extra levy of 2% to help people pay for their own care in future years. In other words, people are saving through the state to help people realise equity from their homes and actually to put together a state-owned pot of people's money to help pay for the care system. We haven't started that in the Isle of Man. We will have to do that for future generations.
How would that happen in a practical nature? How would that happen? You say,
well, it's a social care levy in Jersey. Right. So they've bitten the bullet, and now they're taking nearly 2% extra off of people, and they're talking about taking up to 2.5% extra as a bit like national insurance, but this is dedicated to care. And they've set up a state system to help people realise equity once they still want to live in their houses, but actually to take equity out of the houses while they're still living there. So, it started again now. It's going to be difficult because somebody's got to pay. It's not only older people as well. I'm here all this summer because I have a disabled son, and respite's just got impossible for us apparently now. So it's either me or my wife who's got to be responsible for my son at any time outside the regular weekday hours, and that's expensive. I'm not complaining. I'm not making this to complain. I'm just pointing out the reality that the situation was better last year and 5 years ago than it is now in terms of care for all sorts of people.
The situation with Cumnall Moor, and obviously the fact that Cumnall Moor has been mentioned is coming to the end of its operational life, but no provision and no plan for a definite replacement in the north. And forgive me, but this gives people the jitters, particularly elderly people who don't see any firm future in the future that hitherto was there. The government always gave assurances about things like this.
Yeah, I don't think they've taken away the assurance, but recent censuses show that people are getting better at managing their futures themselves right to their dying breath. So fewer and fewer people are in institutionalised care settings because houses are being designed so they're easier to live in to an extent, and people are making their own arrangements because it's so expensive to go into institutionalised care settings. So we've got to have that discussion. I really appreciate Sue texting in to raise it, and it's got to be intense, and we've got to do something in the next year or so in terms of making decisions about the future. And it will be different. The answer will be different for people who are coming up to those years sooner than people who take longer to wait. We've got to have a multi-generational settlement did differently for different types of aged people.
Okay, I don't mean to conflate this. This is just the way it's fallen. But Dennis dropped a note in just to say, could you put on record your views concerning the assisted dying bill from Mr. Dr. Allinson?
Well, I have put them on view lots of times when it's come up. I'm more of an advocate of making sure that everybody's got the chance to live as long as possible, as healthily and as happily as people. So I always talk about assisted living rather than assisted dying. But and also I'd like to say that the range of possibilities at the end of life is huge. So I have do not resuscitate. I have duty of care for my son. He's always been end of life ever since he was born in legal terms, and so these issues are very, very difficult. And we need to. I wish. In a way, I wish it wasn't Dr. Allinson taking this bill. I said on the doorstep around Douglas Central, I wished it was somebody, not a medical doctor type person. It's going to be incredibly difficult, but I admire him for raising this issue again, and I hope we can come up with the right sort of safeguards, the right sort of arrangements, and remember that the focus is on life is precious right up to your last breath, and so therefore let's think about assisted living as being the focus of it.
Okay, I just want to come back to, and this is text in 429, just to come back to, this is the motorhome lobby coming back. Would you confirm that these future parking arrangements don't just affect motorhomes, campers and commercial vehicles? As far as I can see, it's going to affect a lot of everyday vehicles that exceed the maximum height. So where will those vehicles used every day go? This correspondent just says, I've got a VW Transporter. It's an MPV, not a camper, but it exceeds the height restriction, and it's my sole vehicle. I take up one space usually outside my house. It just seems unfair.
I've got a Volkswagen Caravelle which is based on a Transporter, and that's 2 metres high, and so that would be affected as well. So therefore I think I look back through the legislation. This was clause 42 of a bill that went through in 2020. Nobody raised any of these issues at any time in the House of Keys or the Legislative Council. What we've got now is a simple piece of legislation that says the Department of Infrastructure may make regulations to specify certain vehicles in certain places in terms of overnight and weekend parking, and in good faith a consultation process is beginning, and I think there's going to be changes to the height. It could even end up being specified in terms of weight. It could be specified in terms of the use. So rather than having this as a sort of perceive that there's somebody who has a vendetta against you on your type of vehicle, let's think of this as a consultation process. And if there really is no problem, we don't need any law, and that could be an outcome as well. But I can assure you that this last TT, there were problems with motorhomes and large vehicles all over the island, and people were making complaints about them. So at the very least, we've got to explore whether we need to do anything, whether there's a problem, and if so, how to solve it.
Well, they were putting letters, weren't they, on the ones on the Murrock Promenade in Ramsey? They were
and at the far end of Douglas Promenade as well. The ones in Ramsey weren't the DOI, the ones on Douglas Promenade were, as far as I understand it.
Terry said, can Chris Thomas please give his opinion on who's responsible for the airport, his word, fiasco, acknowledging that the rot set in before his tenure?
So basically, the airport, we all are in one sense, because we all don't pay very much for our airline flights now, and we have airlines that fly very cheaply and have their own models. And I think we all look back, I do certainly, to how air travel was so much better 20 years ago, and even when I first started doing it 40 years ago, it was even better still. So basically, if you take last night's flight cancelled by EasyJet, they just ran out of time and couldn't get their aircraft here and back before 11 o'clock, which is the absolute last closing time of our airport. I think Logan Air has cancelled today because of aircraft difficulties, its Birmingham flight. So essentially, people, still are not paying very much. So the airlines have got all sorts of issues running their flights. We have we're not that large a market in the Isle of Man, but we do pay. We do pay quite a lot for our air tickets compared to some other places travelling and for quite a short journey. We've got to get the right model to work with the aircraft. Department for Enterprise commissioned a report back a couple of years ago, and I think that's got some pretty good conclusions in it about how we need to work with the EasyJets and the Logan Airs and the Emerald Airs and all of the other airlines that could possibly start serving the island. In terms of the airport got into difficulties during the last 3 years in its tower. 9 people, operational people, have been trying to keep us safe when we land and fly from the airport, because it can be that's all I'll say. And those 9 people, one up in the visual control room and one down in the radar room, have been working shifts. Slowly things are getting better. 1st of August changes to rosters seem to have made a difference. We've also got problems in baggage. I'm now of the view that perhaps we need to consider insourcing again the contract that we've just outsourced for a further 3 years, because perhaps that's an experiment that's gone wrong, outsourcing
the baggage
everything.
Handling.
So that's actually just the security handles.
Right.
Baggage handlers actually work for the airlines themselves, and again, that's a private firm doing that, and that did used to once be the airline. But what I said was, I do think that for aviation security we're a bit of an outlier, having outsourced that. So I think over the next few years, as the contract comes up for renewal, we should do that. So basically it went wrong in part through the fact that the overall macro environment for planes is much more difficult these days than for flying. The war in Europe hasn't made it easy, because planes are all constantly going south to avoid Germany and Poland and Russia. Air traffic control is a profession that's short of people. Our own airport has had its own issues, because we're an island. Only once a year do they have the in-classroom training for air traffic controllers. We missed some of those sessions because of COVID restrictions. Basically, we've got an almighty mess, and what we've done for the last year is put in place a programme to deal with the real challenges, and I just hope the Chief Minister doesn't mess with that, because the problems are being solved and they just need to carry on. His idea about corporatising the airport is a red herring. It doesn't change anything as such. It just brings in a new political dimension to positive change that needs to happen to get better airline services for all of us.
What does corporatisation of the airport mean?
Well, who knows, but people suspect it means worsening the terms and conditions of the people who work there. People suspect it might lead to privatisation. To me, it's just a red herring. The real challenges are fixing the tower and working with the people there so that we have a better tower and we don't have to have any runway closures within a few months. It means fixing the baggage handling. It means fixing the security lines. It means getting the catering experience and the general tidiness and cleanliness of the airport better. That's what matters to people, and that's been my focus. Okay. And I believe that's Stu Peters' focus as well now.
Hi, Stephen. You're live with Chris Thomas, MHK.
Hi, Stephen.
Good afternoon, Andy. Good afternoon, Chris. And most importantly, good afternoon, listeners.
Good afternoon.
A couple of points, if I may. The first one is, a brief touch on the motorhomes and the commercial vehicles and vans, and it seems clear to me that at times legislation and regulations are made and pass through Tynwald because it's not given due process and it should be. And on this occasion, it may be because you've raised the issue, Chris, and you've made people aware about this legislation coming, and it's made people realise, oh, hang on, this is going to even affect me. And I think it's something that will affect a lot of people on the Isle, because we're not necessarily a nation of shopkeepers, but we are a nation of small business people, and the only way people can make ends meet is to have lots of times their commercial vehicle, their vehicle with all their tools in, is also the one that they use recreationally to move the family around. So I do hope that this is given sufficient consideration by all our MHKs when they do look at these regulations that are affected. So that's the first point. But secondly, the most important one I'd like to talk about is that we do not have opposition and government within our island political structure. We have everybody that comes along and hopefully tries to formulate a government policy. I think, as Steve Roden once said, it's a date with the unknown Chief Minister, and it's a date with the unknown policies that we get. Now, I, for one, I know that you're a great man for policy, Chris, and it's one of the reasons why I did vote for you, is because it's a policy-driven agenda and manifesto. And I think that that's got to be where we look at, is what went wrong with your tenure, because I was astounded when I read that the Chief Minister wants a minister for the DOI to merely do what the Council of Ministers want them to do in their policy. Now, how can that possibly be right? You may as well just have a chief executive of the department. And also, what astounds me and worries me is we were never told at the last general election about the increase in population. We were never told about the huge number of outsourcing that is wanted to be done by arm's length operations. And when we elect our MHKs, we expect them to be able to solve problems. And it's quite clear to me, if everything that is of a major issue that the government runs is merely put out to an arm's length operation, how on earth can any of our MHKs influence these decisions? So I'd like you to comment on some of those things, please.
No, thank you very much, Stephen. The first point is I completely agree with you. MHKs should pay, and MLC should pay, a lot of attention to any regulations that come forward for overnight and weekend parking. When the bill went through, the focus was on children cycling on pavements, on the quality aspect of highways and pavements. I think also there's a big amendment about whether or not cyclists should wear helmets. That was what the focus was, and this just went through without discussion. So now is the time to actually decide whether we've got a problem, and if so, what we should do about dealing with that problem, because I agree with you, we can have too much enforcement. Freedom is a very important thing in the island. In terms of policy, and I just focus on, I agree with you completely, that's why I moved that we should have a minister and a chief ministers and chief minister, especially the chief minister, and what the chief minister calls his senior ministers should all agree on the direction they're taking them. It shouldn't be 2 years on, we're now deciding a new direction. We should have decided that in line with the mandates that we received at the general election. And I agree with you about arm's length bodies, for instance. So a challenge I'll be taking up is to get inside the Manx Development Corporation and the Isle of Man Steam Packet Company, because they are responsible for huge amounts of money and huge transformations of our nation, and I don't think we know enough as yet in Tynwald or in the Manx public about what's been going on and what's likely to go on. So in that sense, I just want to agree with you.
Thank you. And how do you feel about the issue of a minister must completely agree with whatever is presented to him. Is he then a true minister running the department if he's merely got to follow each line and paragraph of what has been presented to him? Is he not free to deal with the situation as it comes up?
Yeah, exactly. We don't have a presidential system in the Isle of Man. We have a parliamentary democracy with responsible government, and that's not right. However, what do you do about it? That's a tricky one, and I'm sure you and I and others will be talking about it in coming months and years.
OK, Stephen, thanks for calling today. We appreciate it. Mannin Line is on today with Chris Thomas MHK.
Above deck or below, Harbour Marine Services has all your boating needs in one place. From engine sales and servicing to charts, books, dinghies and trailers, electronics, navigation, ropes, rigging and safety. Over 2,000 square feet of stock to help you stay safe on the water. Call 822 995 or find us on Facebook. For all your chandlery supplies, set your course to Harbour Marine Services, next to Castle Down Harbour.
You look happy.
I am. I'd worried about what could happen to my family if I die or can't work, so I've arranged a protection policy with financial options.
Sounds great, but it's another monthly cost.
Yes, but cover starts from as little as £5 a month, a small price to pay for financial peace of mind.
You're right.
Call Financial Options on 612 611 or check out financialoptions.co.im.
Chase Financial Services Limited, trading as Financial Options, is regulated by the Isle of Man Financial Services Authority.
Ramsey Garden Centre opens 7 days a week for roses, shrubs, trees, perennials and an array of pond plants. Or if it's fire pits or solar lights, there's never been a better time to visit Ramsey Garden Centre.
Come together for a night of pure Beatle nostalgia with the Bootleg Beatles. Journey through the swinging 60s with the world's most successful and longest running tribute, bringing the sounds and the atmosphere of the Beatles to life for one night only. Book now at villagaiety.com or on 600 555. The Bootleg Beatles, August 10th at the Villa Marina.
Jump aboard the time train and take a trip back to the 1960s on Carnaby Street every Saturday morning at 8:30 with Isle of Man Railways. It's full of 60s hits and memories. On board the time train, Gladys the tea lady.
Right, boys.
Harry the driver.
Hello, crispy old mate.
Roger the fireman.
All aboard Isle of Man Railways time train.
Oh, and Raffles the dog. And of course you and me. You can win tickets for two for one of the Isle of Man Railways fantastic dining car experiences. Carnaby Street, 8:30 on Manx Radio, on AM/FM, online on smart speakers and all over the world at manxradio.com.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
And Chris Thomas MHK got a message in from Hillary. Actually, she's representing a core of opinion and questions here, and it is: what is your position on onshore wind and offshore wind turbines?
Offshore wind, we've got absolute opportunity with Ørsted that hold the licence off of Mackord. They're talking about generating more than 1% of what's required in the whole of the British Isles by 2050. That's a huge opportunity. The DOI team that's responsible for that, working with AGs, Treasury, DEFRA, has done a huge job working with them. And I met Ørsted recently for the first time, and they were full of compliments for how well the officers had supported them. Onshore, we can have up to 5 megawatt turbines down south or on top of the central mountains, but it's a huge project. I'm neither for it or against it, but I want to do that project right, and I just want people to hear from me today that 2026 is a hugely ambitious deadline, and it's a politically set deadline, because it's in line with the remaining term of this government. So we need to make sure that the planning process, the financing process, the purchasing process is right, because I already worry that this could be the next Liverpool ferry terminal if it's rushed and there are political decisions made that are not based on sound reality.
Actually, that was a point Angela dropped me a note in just to say, whenever I hear the DOI is responsible for, I think of Liverpool ferry terminal, which to most members of the public just seems to be calamitous.
Well, I think it's difficult. I think it's complex. But the first thing I want to disabuse Andrew of is that the DOI is the client on behalf of government for the Liverpool ferry terminal. It's had very little to do with the implementation of it. As Minister, I chaired what's called the Strategic Board, but the Strategic Board has got officers there from Treasury. Treasury Minister came along. It's got the Steam Packet Managing Director. It's got the DFE senior representatives. It's got our project managers. That's a private firm, multinational private firm. It's got our cost consultants, another private sector multinational firm. Council of Ministers gets direct reports from a leading engineer called Arup. So calamitous. I'm not sure that's the right word, but Ewan Watterson and his committee are investigating it. What I would make sure that people know, because I don't really see this as projected, is essentially back in June 2022, the Department of Infrastructure did coordinate a massive report called the Isle of Man Ferry Terminal at Liverpool, which actually reports the budget and expenditure and the risks and what's cost what money completely accurately. And I've encouraged Phil Gorn to make one of his perspective programmes with real experts who can talk through every one of the risks to do with voids, to do with the bollards not being strong enough, to do with the silt and all of those issues, because to me it's well worth the Manx public properly understanding the Liverpool ferry terminal. I've been very disappointed with the Chief Minister and his senior ministers over the last month in respect to the Liverpool ferry terminal, because to me they've added to the confusion about where we really are. We have to, basically there's a contract in place and the money is already contracted. December 2021, Tynwald members were already told about a contingency fund of £5 million that was there available at Treasury to be used on this project, and that hasn't come out clearly. We basically need a whole hour or so of your programmes on Manx Radio to help people understand, talking with real experts, technical experts, engineers and the like, about what's gone on. And I don't think it's fair just to blame the DOI. As the Chief Minister wanted to, I was supposed to be the fall guy for Liverpool Ferry Terminal. A
message in from Philippa who also said, let's hope that when it does open, it actually works, because at the moment we're pouring money in, and nobody's going to know whether the darn thing works, because obviously you've got a big boat. At some point, the Manxman will be onto the link span in Liverpool, facing upstream, and when the Mersey starts to ebb, when it goes out, it's very, very strong.
And there's loads of parts that have got to work. But first of all, let me just disabuse a few myths. The first one is that, do we own it or do we not own it? Well, we had a 236-year lease on it, so we own it for the next 2.5 centuries, which would do you and me out, I think, Andy. We also got to remember that, we could have had what we have at the moment, a landing stage, but if you remember, the landing stage is only for the Mannin. It's not for the Ben and the Manxman. And what we've gone is a more ambitious programme whereby we actually have it up against the wall, so it's a proper ferry terminal for vessels up against the wall. What your text is alluding to quite correctly is that there are still difficulties inside the river with silt. People don't know actually that the landing stage is already dredged from time to time, and that will have to continue. And finally, I just want to close these remarks by reminding people that we do have this asset for 236 years. The patient transfer experience will be better because we have a quiet room in Liverpool. The steam packet will be paying a rent or a future steam packet for that building for 236 years, which will go up. It's not just money that's gone, it's actually an asset that the nation has for 236 years. In 10 years' time, people will still be talking about how they wanted to get it for 25 million and eventually it costs 90 or whatever it is that the Chief Minister said recently. But they'll also be saying, it's a pretty good, pretty smooth service to actually have it right there, 800 metres away from Pier Head with buses and good connectivity beyond. So, in 2 years' time, it'll be a bit like KFC opening on Peel Road. It will be, to an extent, it will have been the massive talking point, the massive catastrophe that became actually something quite pleasant, I hope, that's earning £1 million a year or something like that for 230 years for the people of the Isle of Man in Liverpool.
Back with Chris Thomas MHK in a moment.
Welcome to the Miller Chaps of Ramsey Summer Sale, where you'll find fabulous reductions throughout the store, from beds and flooring to sofas, cane furniture and accessories, rugs, pictures, mirrors and even wallpapers. Plus, the friendly Miller Chaps team are here as always with a warm welcome and expert help and advice when needed. Don't miss the Miller Chaps of Ramsey Summer Sale, now on.
Creating a home where you'll love to be. Chaps of Ramsey.
For powerboat training to become more confident and knowledgeable in our waters, or how to use a boat safely and gain an RYA qualification, contact Chris at Chell Marine on 22 1000 or visit chellmarine.co.uk.
This is 199 Radio Caroline.
Greetings, pop pickers. Let's travel back to the 60s with 2 days of music and fun, August 5th and 6th. Saturday starts with a tribute to the legendary Caroline North. Dress in your most fabby 60s gear and browse the special shop window displays. Then freak out to the Ian Thompson Band in Murag Park. Then on Sunday, Masons in the Park bring it right up to date with local bands from 1 p.m. Plus, there's vintage cars and buses, barbecue, bowling and fun for all the family. And entry's free. Supported by Manx Solar Electrical, Q Plus Callow, and your nation station, Manx Radio. Groovy.
The 2023-24 NWCFL Premier Division season is now underway, and FC Isle of Man will be hoping to make it back-to-back home wins this weekend. The Ravens will host Litherland Remaker at the Bowl this Saturday, with the Merseyside outfit still hunting their first win of the new campaign. Join me, Rob Pritchard and Sam Palmer for FC Isle of Man versus Litherland Remaker this Saturday, kicking off at 6 p.m. Manx Radio will be providing full live match commentary on our DAB and AM 1368 channels. Live coverage of FC Isle of Man on Manx Radio is supported by Selton, investing in our community.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Faster Mike, good afternoon. Hi, Howard, you're live with Chris Thomas, MHK.
Hi, Andy. Hello, Mr. Thomas. Just in your talking a few minutes ago to Andy, you mentioned that the link span and the facilities in Liverpool were built for the Seacat, the Mannin, and not for the Ben or the Manxman. Now, we have had in the past, when the steam packet was taken over by Jim Sherwood, we had what they termed as the Super Seacats, which were monohull. And they were considerably larger at the time than the Seacat that was here. I can't remember what her name was now, but the Snaefell. But as the shipping increases, the numbers, the sizes are going to increase. Now, will the facility in Liverpool that's been paid for now by the Manx people and going to, as rightly they're saying, up to 80 to 90 million pound, will the facilities or have a design being built in to accommodate monohull fast craft? Because the steam packet, I'm led to believe in a few years' time, are wanting to replace the Mannin.
No, that's a very good point, and I read all about what was going on in the late 90s, and it's great that you reminded me of all those names, but I think so. But this is something for that special programme for an hour when we go into the ferry terminal and the future of vessels. You know, I'm looking forward to the Manxman having its passenger certificate and it being able to go to Liverpool the winter after this one. I'm looking forward to learning about the replacement of the Mannin. The thing that I was actually going to announce in July, something that's already been slowed down by the Chief Minister taking away, was I was actually going to announce that the Sea Services Agreement is going to be reviewed in the 6 months leading up to 1st of January 2025, which is what's covered in the Sea Services Agreement. And all of these questions are the ones that we should have on that programme that Manx Radio, I hope, will organise, and also as part of that Sea Services Agreement. But to answer your question, I do believe that the length of vessels is limited to the Haitian max, but I say I'm not a technical person. We need sea captains and we need vessel specifiers in here to talk about all those things more exactly.
What's your concern, Howard?
Well, it's the length of the vessel or the style of the vessel, because the monohull, there were 3 of them here, there were 4 built. 3 of them were operating when Jim Sherwood had it on, from the various ports around the UK, and they're all able to accommodate on the facilities there. They came into the facilities here in the Isle of Man. Haitian Max is what the Manxman is, so you would have to have a ship of that size or under. But you're in open water on the Liverpool. Okay, she might occasionally nip into Haitian, but her majority of her sailing is the summertime, because the Seacat, the style of them, makes them unsuitable for winter sailing in the Irish Sea.
Okay, all right. Howard, thanks for that. Listen, we've got to dash because we're almost out of time, but we appreciate the point. Just very quickly, if you can, if you could be brief on just this one before we come to a final question, Chris Thomas, what are your views on the Summerland site as we are at the 50th anniversary yesterday? What should have happened to Summerland?
Well, I did attend the alternative Summerland memorial yesterday. I do think it will get developed sooner rather than later now, and I do think that something special should be done to as a memorial to 50 people who died 50 years ago and the tragic past. I often talk to Mrs. Brennan about making sure that perhaps we have something there that reminds us of proper risk management, because that's essentially what it was about. We needed new fire regulations after the Summerland fire. We needed new building control regulations after the Summerland fire. And we've got to make sure we don't do things wrong now, like drill for gas inappropriately and cause a disaster like happened then. We've got to make sure that we do things properly in the Isle of Man and are known for doing things properly rather than doing things quickly and badly.
So what's the future for Chris Thomas MHK? You're an energetic MHK. You walk everywhere, it seems. You've had 2 ministerial portfolios. Do you still want to be a minister?
I do want to be a minister. It's important. I mean, I'm so sad and I chose to go to the Department of Infrastructure. I would have gone to the Department of Health and Social Care. Treasury has got massive issues. I really want to play an important part for all of us in the island, for our futures, and to do that best. It's about being a minister, so I would like to be back, but the most important thing is to keep the public policy going in the right direction. My sort of mantra with staff at the Department of Infrastructure and before that at the Cabinet Office was always, if anything goes right, you take the credit. If anything goes wrong, I take the blame. And that's the way I've lived my life, and that's sort of what's happened now. But they are doing so much, moving things in the right direction. I'm on their side, as I still am on the side of previous people I work with, and we've got so much to fix in the Isle of Man government. And currently the Chief Minister and the senior ministers are missing something, and I'm not quite sure what it is, but It's certainly going to be a tough winter.
Thanks for being with us today, Chris Thomas MHK. We're back with an open line tomorrow on 66 13 68. Thanks to Howie Kane on the phones today.
WINT